So the difficulty with faithfully pursuing the means that God has given to his church to wage war against the kingdom of darkness and see the kingdom of heaven expand is that it requires faith to believe that these means will accomplish God's ends. Here's the important part. God calls us to do things to see his kingdom established that don't have a one-for-one correlation with how he establishes his purposes, right? So he calls us to obedience and prayer and worship. And he says, stand back and watch me work, right? Stand back and watch me accomplish my purposes in the world, right? We would like for God to go, okay, here's what I want. I want more of the kingdom in the world. So here's your marching orders. I want you to get so many seats on city council. I want you to start these kind of institutions. I want you to get out and serve in these ways and accomplish these things. And we go, yeah, I'm into that. And what does he say? I want you to go about it a different way. I want you to see my ends accomplished through my means. And we're struck because we don't always know how do these means accomplish this end, right? Like in our math, 1 + 1 = 6, right? It's like, how does me showing up in a room and asking God to accomplish his purposes and laying myself out before him and not eating a meal and fasting and calling upon his name and ordering my life in a simple manner, living a quiet life in obedience and strengthening my family towards these ways, how in the world is God expanding his kingdom reign in the world? And he goes, you have to have faith to see that. So we struggle to understand how spiritual means will accomplish earthly or tangible ends. And we don't like that, especially not as really pragmatic Westerners, right? We want the list. Give me the list, man, like the 5 things that I can do tomorrow to change it in this way. Like we want pragmatism. How's it working? Show me how it's working. And God gives us a different set of means. So what do we do as the people of God? Often we'll exchange his means for more earthly means, right? Here's how we do it. We see darkness in our city around us. We don't see how gathering as God's people to pray with hearts full of faith accomplishes something. We don't see how gathering as the saints on Sunday morning to acknowledge the lordship of Jesus over everything is filling this world with his kingdom. We don't see how strengthening our obedience before the Lord or living quiet lives or strengthening our homes or families accomplish things beyond those realms. And so here's what I find we often do. We often take the means that God has given and we do this, yeah, and. It happens all the time. Yeah, I know prayer matters, guys, but God really needs us to work. And so prayer matters in as much as I throw a little sprinkling of prayer as I'm trying to get to work, right? Am I hitting too close to home? Right? We're running out the door trying to get things done for God, and we throw a little prayer on it because I know prayer really, really matters. Right? But our efforts, our energies, our posture belie what we really believe. Right? And we do this yes and all over the place. Paul exhorts the Corinthians to rightly assess the war before them, employing the means that God has given by him to further his purpose. The weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh. They have divine power to destroy strongholds. Here's how we do it. I love Paul's statement here. Paul gives us some really clear ways forward, right? Hey, you want to push back darkness in your city? You want to push back darkness in your life, in your family? You want to see God's kingdom established? Here you go. Here's some ways. Tear down arguments that set themselves against the love and knowledge of Jesus. Get good doctrine. That's what Paul's saying there. Destroy worldly arguments that raise themselves up against the knowledge of Jesus in your hearts and minds. Not on a crusade, standing up somewhere trying to do massive apologetics everywhere. In your own thinking, your own affections, your own desires. Where are the places where the evil one has tempted you to believe things that exalt themselves against the lordship of Jesus over everything? When you see that, tear that thing down. Tear that thing down. And every lofty opinion. Not just arguments, lots of opinions. We got lots of opinions. Everybody got to share their opinion. Everybody's got to talk about their opinion. Why don't we tear down our opinions and establish the knowledge of God in our midst? Okay, cool. All right, there's a couple. He keeps going. Take every thought captive to do what? Obey Jesus. Okay, the weapons of our warfare, we want to do spiritual battle. Let's get out and accomplish big things for God. And he goes, hey, start with purity of thought and purity of life. You want to do great things for God? Start with purity of thought and purity of life. Jesus then tells many stories that shape our understanding of how unexpected his kingdom will advance in and through the world. Hey, I'm going to give you a little heads up. After Easter, Ricky's going to preach a 3-week sermon series, I think on Philippians 2. It's not 100% sure yet. Maybe I just inked it for him. Then after that, we're going to spend 10 weeks from the end of April up into summer. We're going to do a series called Kingdom Stories, and we're going to look at the parables about the kingdom in the Gospel of Matthew to shape our imagination of how God is reigning in and through his church in the world, to actually reform our imaginations, to see how he advances his purposes in the world and the stories he tells to help us make sense of that. But he tells us that the ways that his kingdom are going to go forth aren't going to make sense like we think they're going to, right? We think there's going to be this one-to-one correlation. He saves us, he brings us into the place of experiencing life in his kingdom, and then we're going to conquer everything. He goes, no, it's going to be a lot more like a seed that goes in the ground and dies, and then slowly grows up to become a tree that produces fruit. It's going to be a lot more like leaven that gets hidden in lumps of dough, and then in the dark, secret places starts to permeate its way through. We must ask God in his grace to give us faith and courage to pursue the ways of transformation and renewal that he has given us in his word. To run after godly ends without pursuing the means that he's given us will end in futility. It will end in compromise, and it will end in a greater dilution of God's truth. I don't mean to throw anybody under the bus. I want to speak with honor about the places and the heritage that we have as the people of God. But one of the things that I've been wrestling with lately is, sadly, I think part of the state that we find ourselves in our society and in our culture and in our world, is that at one point, and you could introduce this in a lot of ways, Christians began to adopt a way of engaging in seeking God's ends outside of God's means. And I think there are methods and practices that we've adopted as churches that are outside of the means that God has given to accomplish what we thought God would desire. They're well-intended, but these sound so good, right? Like, wouldn't God want more people in this building? Right, so let's take everything and lower the bar all the way down so we can get as many people in here as possible. But what's sad is what you use to get somebody in the door, you got to keep doing to keep them there. Right? Like, it doesn't quite work that way. And so I wonder if we find ourselves in this place where there's this call, return, 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 humble ourselves, seek the face of God, take up the means that he has given us so that we would see his ways in this world. To run after this, like I said, it's going to dilute the truth, compromise his people, and end in futility. However, when God's people pursue God's means in a spirit of faith and a spirit of obedience, the gates of hell cannot stand against them. As he drives back darkness, as he brings people into his kingdom, and as he releases his power through his church.